I'm seeing a lot of front ends, like with GPT now, with OpenAI. Anybody who gets their hands on kind of an API is building some type of front end. So is that really the kind of major explosion now that like a lot of people are taking this and trying to kind of get a quick win in terms of building some type of front end, getting in a few subscriptions? Or what type of businesses are you seeing now kind of very early on in having an API available to a lot of these, Cohere and OpenAI? Or what type of businesses are being built now? Like, I know there's hundreds or thousands, but like if you can, do you see a trend already emerging?
Yeah, the impact in general of these foundation models for sure will be huge in the industry and in various use cases. It is a very interesting question to think about, well, which companies are going to be successful at the end, let's say in a year from now. Right now, we're seeing a lot of movement basically across the board. So big companies are integrating those foundation models. A lot of startups are coming up, which are exploring novel use cases of them. For example, writing assistance or summarization is a very big use case. I'm sure there will be a lot of applications as well in the machine translation or cross-lingual type of services too. And currently, we can talk about that if you would like, in terms of how I see this. It's tough to predict, of course. I think that now is a very interesting time. Uh, there's a lot of opportunity. Currently, I actually see this in terms of winners. There will be like a part of me is a little bit skeptical. A part of me is also seeing the opportunity. Actually, I see that the big companies are going to be major winners for sure out of this situation. Companies like Google and Microsoft already they're integrating these models into their products. Microsoft announced Copilot for Office. I don't know if you saw that one, which basically is giving you the access of ChatGPT-like functionality directly within Office, within Excel, within Word, within Teams. You'll be able to generate emails, content, whatever you want, images within Microsoft directly. And so this will be a major win. But at the same time, so these big companies, for sure, there's going to be a big impact that I see. At the same time, there's a lot of those small startups popping up that are trying to use the APIs to build writing assistants and various other tools. There, I find it a little bit more difficult to say which one will be successful or not. And especially because many of them are very similar, they just call the API. And there, in my opinion, there will be a lot of companies that will not make it, unfortunately, because they will not be able to bring an edge over products like Microsoft's Copilot, which already has a large user base. Basically, it can be a writing assistant. It can generate whatever copy you want, talking about, for example, advertisement materials or material for your website, blog posts. It can do that too. So it's a question of what will happen with all of those hundreds of startups that are popping out at the moment in this space. And there is opportunity there too for products to come out. However, there it's getting more difficult. And I think there the companies that really make it will be companies that are bringing in something new that differentiates them from Microsoft and the big companies. This could come up in terms of data sets that they might be able to collect. It might come out also in terms of novel use cases that are very niche and are not really interesting for the big companies. Maybe also in terms of new technology, although that's very difficult for smaller players to bring in, as I mentioned, because developing cutting-edge foundational language models or NLP is becoming increasingly more difficult unless you're very well funded as a startup. So that's how I see it. And also one segment of companies that will for sure be successful is actually going to be the companies that are bringing in foundational technology, both in terms of the hardware and the software. So companies like NVIDIA for sure are going to profit from the whole generative AI situation and large language models, because everyone needs to be using GPUs to run those foundational language models, as well as companies like OpenAI or Cohere. There will be a lot of interest in general from small, medium-sized, and even large companies to use those APIs directly, especially companies who don't have the capacity or the motivation to develop those technologies further themselves, they might want to just call an API and bring in some AI-like features to their products. And they will have to do this as well if they want to remain competitive, because all of those startups are going to come up with the same product but using the API. And those medium-sized companies offering, for example, it could be also a translation company, they can just implement those same features easily by calling the API themselves. And like that, they already have the user base. They'll be able to basically potentially put out smaller companies out of business in the future.
You put out a post on the Global NLP Lab also about the limitations of kind of the API only approach, right? I mean, you touched on some of the limitations already, but maybe let's just go through this quickly again. Again, from a startup point of view, you're just relying on the API and you're building a front end. What are some of the limitations that you listed in that piece?
One major limitation of just calling an API is that you don't have a model that is fine-tuned to your specific domain and your use case of interest. So let's say you're focusing on an application use case that is targeting biology. The API approach is going to be basically limited to what the model has learned from the for the tens of hundreds of gigabytes of data of biology it has basically seen from Wikipedia and similar sources on the internet. However, the model has also seen not only biology documents, but also, let's say, financial data, news articles, various topics unrelated to what you're trying to achieve. So a model fine-tuned on biology will, of course, always outperform a model fine-tuned on the whole of the internet. And this is one limitation, that you cannot really easily get a model that is specialized to your specific, really narrow domain and application that you want to target with APIs. So that's something to consider if you're looking into using APIs directly for your use case. I think there's a big value in using APIs to put together quickly application prototypes. And at the moment as well, there's still like a buffer period, like if you want to make a startup or so in this space. There is a possibility, I think, still to put together a very powerful product. Nobody has thought about this. But quickly, you need to basically collect, in my opinion, custom data sets. And you need to think about, okay, what will be the next step? What will happen? Because what will happen is you're going to have 10, 20 more companies, both small startups and big startups, which might have data that you don't have access to, which will fine-tune the model and will be able to outperform you on long term. So that's one thing to consider, no specialization. Another one is the lack of differentiation that you will have if you're just calling an API. So if you want to get investment for your startup, a question is going to come up, of course, like, what do you bring to the table? Do you just have an interface and you're just calling this API and, okay, magically, is it going to work on long term? Probably not, because you don't really have nothing that basically keeps you on the edge compared to the competition, compared to the hundreds, potentially other companies in the same space as you that could just might be doing something slightly different, but they might just decide to integrate an API themselves and target the same use case you are targeting. And if they do that, basically you will be out of business. So this is one thing to consider for sure, if for someone who is looking into using this technology as a core business strength that they want to have. And the final thing to keep in mind too, that if you're just calling an API, you don't really have ownership of the technology. So in that sense, you don't really understand what precisely is going on in the background. You cannot really give precise guarantees to your customers regarding what they can expect. You also might have issues like privacy, as well as various privacy or data concerns. Cannot really give promises that what your users are providing to your app, how it's being treated and how it's being processed by those API providers. So basically, you're having limited flexibility as well when you're using the APIs for as a key component in your business.